that you're here to oh, all right, we'll start that over. Good evening. Thank you for joining us. We're so glad you're here to share in the wonder of Wisconsin hummingbirds and to talk about how we can help them at home. This is the first in our Mighty Migration series spotlighting tiny animals making epic migrations. Tomorrow, we'll look into the chimney swifts and learn all about their swiftnadoes. And on Wednesday, we'll marvel at monarch butterflies. Tonight, my name is Lisa Gomnitz, and I coordinate the SOS Save Our Songbirds campaign. And we're one of the sponsors for tonight's presentation. Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance and the Natural Resources Foundation of Wisconsin are the other co-sponsors, and each of our presentations has other local partners. Tonight's presentation is also brought to you by Journey North. Some of you may be thinking to yourself, SOS Save Our Songbirds, hummingbirds aren't songbirds, and you're right. But we love hummingbirds. They winter in the same places that many of our songbirds do, and they face the same threats. Fortunately, tonight, we have a fantastic presenter to tell us all about hummingbirds, Jennifer Lazewski. She'll be followed by short remarks from Bill Wilson, who's founder of one of the oldest bird-friendly coffee companies in North America. He'll share what it means to be bird-friendly and why buying bird-friendly certified coffee will help hummingbirds and songbirds. Bill will also share a surprise to make it even easier to help you try this delicious coffee. I'll return for a few minutes to wrap up with some tips on how to keep hummingbirds from hitting your windows, because studies have actually shown that ruby-throated hummingbirds are the second most vulnerable birds to window collisions. They collide at a rate that is 175 times that of the average bird. So fortunately, there's things that we can do to prevent that. So with that, I'd like to introduce Jennifer to you. She may be a familiar face or name to many of you. She's been featured in articles about hummingbird gardening and has spent more than a decade enthusiastically advocating for birds, pollinators, and wildlife gardening. She's a master gardener and master naturalist volunteer through those UW-Madison Division of Extension programs. She's the former executive director of the Wisconsin Society for Ornithology, founder of the Southeast Wisconsin Master Gardener Pollinator Group, and co-manager of the native plant sale for the Weir Nature Center in Milwaukee County. Welcome, Jennifer, and thank you for sharing your expertise and your love of hummingbirds.
So thank you very much for coming tonight. It feels great to have such a nice, enthusiastic crowd that's interested in hummingbirds and how to help them. So we're going to start off talking very briefly about some of the biology. We're not going to dwell on it too much because there's a lot of really fascinating things about hummingbirds and how they operate and how their body works with all the unusual characteristics that they have. For anybody who really wants to dive into that, I encourage you to watch some of the PBS specials. They often do a great job when they're talking about hummingbirds and pollinators on focusing on some of the most interesting studies about them. So that they give you all of that high-speed video, which has really helped scientists learn a lot more about hummingbirds and their behaviors recently. So I encourage you to think about other ways to get that information. Then we're going to talk about their migration, both going north and going south. And then we're going to talk about ways that you can help support them in your own yards with some things that are very important for habitat and food for them. Not just pretty nectar plants, but the serious stuff about creating good habitat. Their wings are very, very light and work very fast. So typically, if they're flying or diving, it might be even faster than that. They have extremely strong shoulder muscles to help support that, a higher proportion of muscle and weight than a lot of other birds. They can hover for extended periods of time compared to some birds who might be able to do it for a little while. They can actually move backwards briefly, which is something that's unique among birds. And the main thing we're going to focus on as we talk about how they eat and what they need is that this incredibly fast metabolism needs support in a lot of ways that are different from other birds or even other animals. Their colors come from the light. They are not pigmented themselves. So depending on what the light situation is, they may appear very colorful, or some of those bright colors may be dark, as in the male ruby throat at the feeder. Or sometimes when you see them when they're more in shadow, you can tell it's a male because it has that throat, but it's dark. You're not necessarily going to see the red. And hummingbirds are very difficult to take photos of, so I can't claim credit for all of these. And I did just want to point out that Susan Marr, who's worked with Extension in the Master Gardener group and is since retired, but still leads some great tours down to Costa Rica and is active in the state. She has a wonderful article with great photos about hummingbirds in the garden, so both the hummingbirds and the flowers. Females don't have as attractive and bright a coloring, and as you can see here, it helps provide that perfect camouflage when they're sitting on a nest, so they're less visible. And anybody who's lucky enough to find a hummingbird nest understands what a big deal it is, because they're so small and they are so hard to see because they're so well camouflaged. The way to identify the ruby-throated is the only breeding bird east of the Mississippi and in our area. So most hummingbirds you see are going to be ruby-throated. There are a couple of exceptions I'll mention briefly after this. But as we saw, the male has that bright red throat or gorget in coloring. They also don't have any white feathers at the tip of their tail once they are fully mature. So you will see young males as juveniles the first year, and they won't necessarily have all that coloring. They'll start to develop some red feathers as they molt, but for the most part, they're not going to have that coloring until they're into their second year. Females don't have that throat coloring. Some different hummingbird species, some of the females will have a little bit of color. The white tail feathers are a characteristic of females, and as I mentioned, all juveniles also. So males, they'll get to be less and less, but when you see those white tail feathers splash, you know you're looking at either a female or a first-year juvenile. The other occasional visitors, we have had Rufus, which is rusty color, Annas, which have more of a purple head and gorget for the males, and a little bit on the females, and Allen's hummingbirds. A lot of these, the females look very similar to ruby-throated, and they can be difficult to tell apart even when you know they're all in the mix. And so you may not spot them if they happen to come through during the summertime. When most people see them is if you see hummingbirds in later September, definitely October into December even. These are hardier hummingbirds. They occasionally go roaming outside of their range all over the country. So if you refer to that eBird article, it'll give you information about how to contact the hummingbird banders in Wisconsin. And it is something we try to pay attention to and get some scientific information on when those late hummingbirds are around. So I was fortunate enough to host one in 2016 from late October to the first day of the Christmas bird count in mid-December. It's a heavy responsibility, but it was a really fun thing to have happen. With the ruby-throated migration, there's really, you can see a wide range of breeding area in red. So it stretches throughout most of southern Canada and then comes down, not exactly with the Mississippi River, a little, west of there, through all the East Coast states. And their or the wintering areas are in green. So it's mostly in southern Mexico, the Yucatan Peninsula, and part of Central America. There's actually a little bit of green tip in Florida. There are now some hummingbirds that tend to stay during the winter, and I have seen them down in southern Florida. There's a Hong Kong orchid tree right outside my parents' place, so it's wonderful to hear them chittering away and see them, but that's not the majority of them. Um, some of them do cross the Gulf of Mexico directly, and like a lot of the other breeding birds, they need those favorable winds. They'll tend to depart when they have those winds that help push them south. And sometimes they'll even stack up on the coast, kind of waiting for those favorable winds before they cross the Gulf. But many of them will also go through Mexico by land. So kind of that area in Texas and Louisiana is one of the big gathering and points that they come through during their migration. Going north, this is, a little bit of a busy map, but hummingbirds.net used to have kind of volunteers who were vetted, who would always report their first sightings, and they would get reported on a map like this. So they just to kind of show you, they usually reached Wisconsin in late April to mid-May. Those first arrivals, though, typically are passing through on their way further north. So if you're lucky, you might see them at your feeder, but you might not see a hummingbird consistently at your feeder until, late April and into May, sometimes even later. Uh, some of them, it's hard to prove this by science. They have occasionally had some banding evidence, but I know a lot of us have experienced this kind of our own little feedback, that they may use the same route and come to the same feeders. I can remember a couple of years ago, I had my Oriole feeders out, and usually I transition them somewhere around Mother's Day to hummingbird feeders. And there was literally a male hanging right by the feeder as I was standing there going, well, where's my feeder? Why isn't it here? Like he recognized this is where it usually comes, and it wasn't a hummingbird feeder yet. So I quickly switched it out so he would be happy and at least stay for a day. The routes, the timing usually follows the insect emergence, similar to a lot of other migrating birds, because insects are an important part of hummingbirds' diets, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. And if the insects aren't really out or there's not a lot of nectar, they may use holes drilled by sapsuckers, both to drink the sap and to find insects that happen to be stuck in it. So here's the map. It's not quite the latest update version. That one was a little harder to pull, but Journey North does weekly maps for spring based on observations from people all across the country. They do rufous hummingbird as well as ruby-throated hummingbirds, and kind of week by week, there's an active map that builds and it will play, so you can kind of see as they move up when you're talking about the migration north. So hummingbirds migrate individually. They don't come in flocks. So those individual sightings give us a good idea of what the timing is and where they are. There's always a couple of aberrant ones ahead. Almost everything with migration is a bit of a bell curve. You have the early departures and then the very late departures, and the bulk of them in the middle in kind of, increases until the peak and then, diminishing after that. So with hummingbirds, males come up first. They come up a little bit earlier. They find and establish their territories, and then the females follow. Once they're here for breeding and nesting, The females do it all by themselves. They mate very quickly with the males, and they typically will be producing two young in each batch, or hopefully they both survive. So they spend about 5 weeks from eggs to fledging, and then the mothers will continue to feed, hopefully both babies, for about a week after that. During this time, I often see, a pair of hummingbirds that seem to be fighting, but they're not really driving each other away. And sometimes they'll even land pretty much next to each other somewhere. So I think that's typically when you get a chance to see those youngsters and fledglings. They practice what they need to do later with each other first, and then start finding their own spaces. There may be a second nesting period also. Most years there will be, in most locations there will be. The males will still be around long enough for that. And I hear often from people, well, where did they go? I saw them come and then I didn't see them for a long time. Well, the males, can do what they want. Sometimes they'll shift around. They have a territory, but they don't necessarily always stay there or stay visible. But the females are generally off in tall trees and woodlands, so they may be a little away from your property. They might come by occasionally to your nectar feeder or your flowers, but they really are focused on being in an area that's kind of away from food, where there's less likely to be predators looking for them, because they would be staking out, where they'd normally eat. So there's a little bit of that, but you will still see the females coming through to feed. They have to feed. So and the nests are made of a lot of different plant materials, typically things that, are smaller, like you can always see, usually the moss and lichen that helps camouflage it. They are put together with spider webs. It provides that flexibility from those small eggs to as the youngsters grow in the nest. And then it's typically lined with soft and fluffy materials. So it's great if you have pussy willows in your yard. I typically don't trim off some of my cultivated clematis seed heads, or there's also a native one. So anything that kind of helps provides those fluffy seeds, they'll use. When they turn around to head south after that nest or two during the breeding season, um, both the males and females are building up fat reserves. So they do the same when they're down in Mexico and Central America before they come north, but we get to see it in that late summer as they're doing that. You can see how they get plumper. In this case, when they're banding a hummingbird, they do a little, breath to see the fat and the fat levels. And in this case, the bottom, we have a hummingbird who couldn't bother to hover because he's really plumped up there before departure. So you can usually see a nice distended stomach when they're ready to go, or when they're coming through once they've started their migration. Again, the males leave first, and then the females, and then the juveniles. So, depending what the timing is when you're looking at your hummingbirds, this might help you sort through a little bit easier who is who, depending on when they're leaving. There are some males that have probably already departed, and most are in the process now because we're hitting about the middle of August. So there's about a month left that hummingbirds may be around. Pretty much by the third week in September, nearly all of them are gone. As I mentioned, some do stay in the US now, especially as things warm for the winter, but the majority of them will go back down. So we don't have quite as much data usually for the migration south. It's a little inconsistent. People aren't as eager to report as when they're coming up. So we don't have quite as many people reporting. It also might tend to be, the last ones they see. So you're not going to necessarily see the same impact of a lot up north, and see that pattern of movement through. But it's still very interesting information. What I'm going to spend some time talking about now is what we need to do to support hummingbirds. It's really what we need to do for all wildlife and all birds and all pollinators is to work on the complete habitat picture. So any habitat you're talking about for wildlife usually includes these same or similar elements. You have to provide food, all kinds of food that are important to that animal. You have to find places where they can shelter from the elements, from the sun, from the wind, but also that offers them some protection from predators. And then in this case with birds, you need to provide nesting space, and they may not be on your property. If you don't have a real tall tree, if you only have shrubs or you have one tree that's not too big yet, they may not nest in your yard. When I see the birds that are nesting around me, they're typically in one of my neighbor's trees. I have a 100-foot linden and my neighbors behind me. They used to love the river birch before the last wet snow took it out, another neighbor over. So they typically prefer to be in a little, in a different area than, say, where you would see a cardinal nesting or some other birds. For most wildlife, water is kind of optional. For birds, yeah, they like bird baths, running water, those things that will bring them into your yard, and they need it somewhere nearby. So again, that's not something you necessarily have to have in your own yard. You can cooperate with your neighbors. You might be close to, some other water features in nature. So there are some other ways that can be provided also. We're going to start with some of the easiest things first and finish up with food. So with water, hummingbirds, like all birds, like to bathe and preen. If you want them to use things in your yard, you have to think about how they need to be really shallow. You may just put a mister and not even have a bird bath. If you have water features and ponds and moving water, make sure there are places where it's very shallow, so it's not going to be concerned for small birds. Protection from predators. So again, some of this they share with other birds. Their number one enemy is cats. Over 2.4 billion birds a year are killed by cats. And yes, that's billion with a B. So it is one of the biggest issues we face as we're looking at trying to increase the number of birds and provide for them better. There's information, the American Bird Conservancy has a lot of fantastic information about cats and keeping cats indoors. That's mentioned at the bottom. You've got the bird predators, hawks, possibly owls, but because the nocturnal doesn't work too well with hummingbirds, that might not be as much of a factor. In the upper right, you see a Chinese praying mantis. They are just huge, taking out a monarch there on the Monarch Trail in Wauwatosa here, not far from me. And they are fully capable of catching hummingbirds off of feeders. So it's one of those things that if you have a feeder, you want to keep an eye on it once in a while. And there are, occasionally some of the bigger crab spiders, things like that might be a factor. And as with any birds and nests, there are potential nest predators in the trees, small mammals, snakes, things like that. And then you're going to hear a little bit more on window collisions later. So shelter is really shelter from the elements. This is my backyard. You'll see a couple of different photos at different times from there. But having shrubs that are a significant size that are also protected on one side by a wall or my neighbor's garage or, something that means that there's a side that they don't have to worry about as much from predators. That can be very helpful. It also protects them from wind. land. They prefer shrubs that tend to have a lot of small twigs. You can see the hummingbird in the middle of one of them there. Conifers is often where they will go at night, or trees where, you know, the leaves and things are a little denser, especially as the weather gets a little bit cooler. And also vines where they can hang out and feed at the same time, either on insects or on nectar, as in we're going to talk about it a little bit later, the trumpet vine in the far right. Hummingbirds also need perching spots. So it's something that's not necessarily unique to them. Other birds perch, but their high metabolism means that they can't be flying all the time. You know, that kind of flight takes up a lot of energy. So they actually spend a lot of time just sitting around. And the more perching spots you have, the more likely they are to stay around, and the more you get to see them. So they are perching to check out, see what's going on, protect their territory against other hummingbirds or other things that come in. But they also need quite a bit of time after they feed on nectar and other things to sit still, digest, relax. So they use all kinds of small twigs and any kind of wire. This is my utility wire running through the yard. And this was a pair of those hummingbirds who were fighting and then landed not too far from each other. And every time I tend to do a lot of containers for hummingbird plants. They're not necessarily native plants, and they prefer a little drier soil. And also hummingbirds are more likely to use them if they're up from the ground, where they don't have to worry as much about predators. So I tend to put a lot of those plants into containers. And then I also include some of these trellises with small bars and things like that. It both provides a place for the vines to grow. There are a lot of vines that hummingbirds like, but also places where they can potentially perch, and often they do. So one point that I really wanted to emphasize is that hummingbird food is not just nectar. Um, that's what most people think of, and that's how they see hummingbirds in their yard. But as with all birds, insects are incredibly important. These two components really provide both that quick energy with nectar, which is carbohydrates, and that sustaining energy, which is insects who are protein. So they need both. It's a really hard thing to study. You know, there are some studies about what the contents of hummingbird stomachs are, and but they think that the nectar gets digested a little bit quicker and the insects take a little bit longer. So, the timing isn't necessarily going to work. And there's all kinds of things, different percentages, in terms of insects versus nectar. Ultimately, it doesn't matter. As somebody who's working to help wildlife, you need to have both. So we're going to talk about both. Um, with insects, hummingbirds do what's known as hawking, which means they grab insects out of the air. They also do gleaning, as you think of with warblers when they're going up and down a branch and eating the insects they run into under the leaves, under the bark, wherever they can find them. So the one thing that's added with hummingbirds and some of the other, insect kind of insectivore birds is the sally hawking or sally gleaning. So what is sally? It's not the dance that you go to where the girls ask the boys. It's sally forth or go out. So they do all that perching, and then they go off their perch, sometimes to chase away some of their competitors, but it's just as often to go grab an insect. We might see the insect. A lot of times we don't, because a lot of the things they eat are very, very small insects. So we say arthropods because spiders are an incredibly important component, and technically they're not insects. But a lot of the small things, the gnats, especially fungus gnats, mites, thrips, aphids, things that are considered bad bugs in your garden, a lot of different flies, bugs, and beetles, especially when they're tending to a nest. But as I mentioned, spiders are really one of the key components. So they both use the web, and they find that that's an important part of their diet. Um, so as you can see from these photos, which are both from my yard, you want to keep some of those dead and dying branches and edges because that's where they really like to perch. Then they don't have to worry about the leaves or a view obstruction or anything else. So there are a lot of things about, even with hummingbirds, why you don't want to keep your garden neat. You want to really make it that habitat. So for anybody who hasn't got the message yet, insects matter. Hummingbirds need them to survive, and so do nearly all other birds. Doug Tallamy has done a great job with his books and with Homegrown National Park website to explaining about this and why. You know, he's an insect person who is using birds as a more charismatic species to emphasize that how it's very important that we're all doing this in our yards to help make up for some of the habitat that's lost in more natural, what used to be more natural places. I think almost everybody's also heard of the big study in 2019 that nearly 3 billion birds are lost. The annual studies haven't been much more optimistic about that so far. So we're seeing some species have a little bit of an uptick. So we're always hopeful. You know, the conservationists can't be anything but there are significant factors going into this. So again, you're really working to build an ecosystem, to try to create larger habitat areas and corridors between areas. Where I am in Wauwatosa, which is a Milwaukee suburb, is in between a bend in the Menominee River, which became a big factor last week. But it also means that I'm kind of a mile away from a lot of natural habitat. So if we can help build up those areas in between, that'll make a wider area that hummingbirds and other wildlife can use. Um, Hummingbirds, the more your neighbors participate, the more hummingbirds you will see. I had that conversation with a lot of neighbors who were like, well, I don't want to put up a feeder. I don't want to put in flowers because I'll take away your hummingbirds. And that's not true at all. Hummingbirds, there are a lot of them that just go on a route. They go all over the place during the day. And really, we have found that the more people that are doing this, the more birds that we all get a chance to see. Whether it's because more birds might be nesting there or more males are establishing habitat, who knows? But it's still fun. And also making room for insects in your yard. You know, I keep saying how important that is, and we really want to keep emphasizing that. So they really are a crucial part of your yard. And just to make sure everybody understands, any pesticide is not good for the wildlife in your yard. While it might not kill it outright, there are proven cumulative effects as you keep putting things in your yard. And the fact is that homeowners are heavier users of a lot of pesticides than even farmers, because people just pick up the bottle every time they see something they don't like and they can overdo it. One of the big issues right now is mosquito spraying. And I was just at an event yesterday where Marge Gibson from Reggie was talking about that almost every hummingbird that comes in, it's usually some kind of neurotoxin, and they just don't make it. They're just too small. They can't take running into that fog or those toxins or eating a whole bunch of insects who might have been exposed to these things. Another concept that's come up is soft landings or building basically a habitat under your trees. As everybody carts away their leaves, they're also taking away all the insects that go with them. So rather than do that, build up a garden under your trees. So it also gives you a place to leave the leaves as well as being an insect refuge. And the leave the leaves concept. This is my yard in spring before I do my spring cleanup instead of my fall cleanup. I actually don't rake away any of the leaves. They have a tendency to dry up and blow away during the winter. So that's a lot less work for me. So I can enjoy my fall hiking and bird watching instead. And I wish I had that yard in the middle. But for those of you who are more concerned with having an attractive yard, that's a concept of adding that soft landing space, doing your habitat layering with trees and shrubs and perennials, and creating more of these island beds that allow you to scoop the leaves into there so it's not sitting on your lawn, but you're still giving yourself a place to do that. Feeders are strictly supplemental. They are a lot of work. So you have to be committed if you do them, because if you don't do them correctly and you're not cleaning them out and changing the nectar every 2 to 4 days, depending how hot it is, and making sure there's no mold in it and using strictly white sugar, honey, cane sugar, none of those other things work, or I should say the, kind of coffee sugar things. So you have to be very strict about it and you have to be very committed to it if you're going to do it. And the last point is you can keep them feeders up as long as you want. You're not going to keep any hummingbirds here. They're going to migrate when they migrate, and it might help one of the late season ones coming through if you keep them up later. Hummingbirds are pollinators for a lot of the annuals and cultivated perennials. Those are sterile, but for native plants that you have and out in natural areas, they actually can be significant pollinators for certain native plants. So you can see some of those adaptations that make sure that pollen gets onto them and into the next plant. So real quickly, in a garden and what you're planting, they like long tubular flowers. You can see their tongues come out in that right-hand picture. So they can get fairly deep into flowers, and there's less competition for those flowers than many of the other ones. So just a couple of suggestions for native plants. There are here in the photos, I've got the Salvia azurea, which is not strictly native to Wisconsin, but can be grown here in some dry soils. You kind of have to pick your spots for those of us who have clay soils, but sometimes you can find places here and there. So these are the bright red are some of the most common. Penstemons is where you'll often see them in the spring, and there is a native honeysuckle vine. So be careful, don't use the Japanese ones or the other non-native ones, but try to use the native instead. For some cultivars, I am a native plant person, but I'm admittedly not a purist. And when you talk about what your neighbors might be willing to do, that photo in the upper left is the neighbor behind me who has a ton of tall hostas they use and a lot of red bee balm. So you might not be able to convince them to go native, but you can at least, sometimes convince them to help pollinators. The annuals, if you really want to work hummingbirds and see them as much as possible, you really have to have some of these around. They'll do a whole circuit, they'll hang around in this collection of containers, typically during peak season. They might spend 5 or 10 minutes going through it, so you get a little better chance to see them. And then there are also vines and seeds. I do trellises where I only have a foot of soil between my house and driveway. and they're perfectly fine for a lot of different hummingbird vines. There are also some that require starting from seed because they're not something you'll readily see at a garden center. The Salvia coccinea has gotten more common, especially in Madison's. Klein has some of them in, basically your small seedlings. But there's a particular Nicotiana that hummingbirds really favor over peace pipe and some of the other ones. It's usually called Nina. And some of the funky annual monardas are fun for them too. And then just to warn you, two of the biggest known hummingbird plants are not necessarily super garden friendly. So you can see trumpet creeper vine has these gorgeous big flowers with tons of nectar and is definitely a hummingbird favorite, but it will take out a wood fence. I've seen it happen to my neighbors. So you have to have the right kind of support. You have to not mind all that suckering. And the same thing with jewelweed. I have it in my yard, and if I'm not busy pulling in the spring, it is everywhere, including in sun, not just shade. So you have to be careful about these two. But the good news is that it really doesn't take much space to create that habitat, to give them the places they need and the plants they need and the insects they need to do well in even an urban space. So thank you very much for your time and attention. I really appreciate that you're here and that you want to learn more about hummingbirds. Thanks.
That I copied down, Jessica asks, she has a nest right now in her yard. How late will they nest?
They'll probably be finishing up. I mean, that's, as I said, that late the September departures are typically the females and the juveniles, and some will hang a little later. They may also go a little ways down. The juveniles kind of learn along the way. So typically, my understanding is they'll stay closer to the nest for a while, but as it gets later in the season, that's a little less likely. They might have to move on, or they see everybody else moving on, so they'll have to learn along the way. Nature has it, like I said, it's bell curves, and sometimes things work better than others, and that's just the way it is.
Okay, here's another question that came in from Beth Brinkman. She said, what's the best way to clean a hummingbird feeder? Soap and water, or should you use a little bleach?
I typically have multiple feeders to switch out, which can make it a little easier. Saucer cleaners or saucer feeders are easier to work with and easier to clean. Like when I used to do the runs to replace all the zoo ones, that's what they use there. I do tend to like kind of more the glass Perky Pet style, and that does leak a little bit. If you have a good brush and you're very attentive, you can often catch it before you have mold. But once you have mold, I'll admit, I would rather be sure and bleach it. It's like a 1 to 8 formula, so it's not, regular bleach, not super strong. Other people insist vinegar is fine, but I'm always going to be in favor of the bird being protected and then just rinsing it really, really well.
Great. Here's another question. If you have a lot of squirrels in your yard, will that discourage hummingbirds from nesting there, even if you have tall trees?
Who knows how they pick where they nest? Lord knows we have lots of squirrels in our neighborhood. One of the most interesting studies is how hummingbirds actually set up nests under some hawks because the hawks actually protect them from some of the predators. So there are all kinds of weird dynamics as to where hummingbirds nest and why, and we don't understand all of them.
Okay, 2 more questions came in and then we'll get rolling with Bill there. If hummingbirds fly solo, how do they all know where they need to go when they're migrating?
One of the great mysteries of migration. I'm sure you'll hear more some of the other programs. It seems to be a combination of sunlight, magnetic, earth elements. I'm no expert in that. I know they keep trying to figure it out. But it is one of those magical things about how that timing works and also how it's going to coincide with climate change and a number of changing influences. It may not work as well as it used to. We're going to have to wait and see.
And then one last question. I guess we'll let these two, and then we'll push some of those to the end if we can, so we can get on to Bill here. But how far apart should multiple feeders be?
It depends. You can get a very territorial hummingbird who will chase away everything in the vicinity for multiple weeks. Females can be just as aggressive as males that way. I had one once. So it can be best to put them out of view from each other. I typically have 2 to 3 in my backyard. I've had as many as 5, but it didn't really seem to make much sense to keep filling those other ones. Usually I have one in front of my neighbor's house and possibly one around another corner. It's definitely front and backyard is a great combination because they can't see each other, and then you're likely to have more hummingbirds served. It seems like I sometimes have some that come through the front and not necessarily the back, but all that's anecdotal. You can't always tell one hummingbird apart for another, but they do develop routes and patterns sometimes at the exact same time every day. So once you see when they're coming through, and if you see it multiple times around that same time, you can kind of stake things out so you get a better chance to see your hummingbirds.
Great. And last question from Maggie. She asks, is there a way to prevent hornets or bees at the feeders? Right now, they're really giving her hummingbirds trouble.
Yeah, again, the saucers are often better for that because the nectar goes down a little ways and isn't as accessible. Saucers basically have the nectar in the bottom with holes on the top. So it takes something that's longer to get into the nectar as opposed to a tube feeder where the nectar's flowing out the bottom. Some people also say that the yellow that usually the guards are, can actually attract some wasps. So, there's that. Either you can take them out or, do it a different color. So there's a lot of little things like that, but there's really no way to prevent the flying insects from getting into them other than to take it down for a while. And that does tend to discourage them. With ants, you can get little moat features to put between, where you hang and where the feeder is. And as long as you keep those water levels up, those are a significant deterrent for ants. But the flying insects will come in no matter what you do.
Great. Well, Jennifer, thank you so much for all that wonderful information and all the tips that we hope people can put into action on their land there. With that, we'll turn to Bill. And Bill, I'm going to let Bill introduce himself, other than he is the founder and the owner of Birds and Beans Coffee. He's been a great partner to SOS Save Our Songbirds and to birds. His company is one of the ones that's been in the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center bird friendly certification program the longest. So we look forward to hearing from Bill.
Thank you very much, Lisa. And Jennifer, thank you so much. I wish I knew as much about anything as you know about hummingbirds. So we're going to talk a little bit about something I know a little bit about, which is bird-friendly coffee and its relationship to birds and farmers and the earth we all share. So why is bird-friendly important, and why is bird-friendly coffee important? And I'm going to tell you just a little bit about our company, Birds and Beans Coffee, and why we started it and what it's all about and what we're trying to accomplish going forward. So in 2007, I learned about coffee and its relationship to migratory birds. And today I'll probably use the words neotropical migrants and neotrops, because that's sort of coffee birder jargon. But what I found out kind of amazed me. I knew a lot about coffee. I knew a lot about birds. I always loved birds. I always loved coffee. And I was stunned that a change in agriculture had made such a big difference in the survival, the number rates within the neotropical migrant community. So we're talking about almost all the wood warblers, a lot of all the orioles, uh, rosebesser grosbeaks, all the sort of flycatchers, um, broad-winged hawks, amazingly, and I thought, well, this is pretty interesting. And I was in transition, as they say. My family and I had lived in Europe for a long time. We'd moved back. I'd sold my company in England, and I thought, well, this is good. I'll do some work on bird-friendly coffee, and that'll be a hobby. Well, it's turned out to be kind of a profession and an obsession. Okay. So Jennifer already talked about 3 billion birds gone. And a lot of these birds are migratory birds, obviously. And deforestation, agriculture, and climate change are the major contributors. And when I say agriculture, I mean agriculture. And that ties back to bugs. If we don't have bugs, we don't have birds. So in agriculture today, modern agriculture doesn't like bugs. Birds like bugs, but agriculture doesn't like bugs. Deforestation is a whole other issue. One of the reasons that bird-friendly coffee is so important is about 40% of the tropical zone that neotropical migratory birds depend upon is in Latin America. And most of the forest in those territories has already been destroyed. Coffee doesn't fix nitrates, so it likes to grow in a forest, and that's where coffee has been grown since they discovered coffee in Yemen a long time ago. The Europeans brought coffee to Latin America, perfect place for coffee in tropical forests, stuck coffee plants in underneath the trees, and created the second most important or third most important cash crop in all of South America. Coffee's grown in from sort of the middle of Mexico down through the Andes, even as far as Bolivia. The big coffee countries are Brazil and Colombia. Also, coffee is grown around the world on the equator in a band. And India and Vietnam are growingly important coffee places. But the coffee that we deal with and that we import to the United States and that we roast and put in our bags is all from Central America and Peru. From Central America, it's from Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua. And Peru it's from the northern part of the Peru in the Amazon mountains on the eastern side, Amazon River Basin, the Andes Mountains to the Amazon River Basin. So next slide, please. Who's controlling my slides? Okay. So 2.9 billion birds gone. A major percentage of these are these birds that we're talking about today that depend on tropical climates for their wintering, and they are disappearing. That's like 25% of the bird population of North America has disappeared in 50 years. Well, that's not something that can happen much longer, and that's what we're trying to be a small thing that is part of changing. Next slide, please. Hello. We could go through a lot of different birds. It's the same sort of story. All of our roasts, by the way, are named after a migratory bird that you have in Wisconsin during the spring and summer nesting season. Baltimore Oriole, one of my favorite birds. There are 28% fewer Baltimore Orioles on the face of the earth than there were in 1970. And we can go through the other roasts we have. Our dark roast is Scarlet Tanager. Baltimore Oriole is dark roast decaf. Chestnut Sided Warbler is a darker medium roast. Wood Thrush is a medium roast. American Redstart is light roast. Kingbird is our espresso. And Blackburnian Warbler is our pumpkin, which will be reissued again in pumpkin season next week. Or the week after. Okay, next slide, please. So I'm kind of now living on this idea because it's a way I can stay sane. Whatever you do may seem insignificant to you, but it is most important that you do it. So I'm on the vibe that every cup of coffee that's bird friendly is a cup of coffee that's not bird friendly. So every cup of coffee that's bird friendly is grown in a forest. We buy all our coffee from small family farms and co-ops. So it's supporting migratory bird habitat, indigenous bird habitat. It's all organic, so it's supporting the no putting toxic chemicals in our environment, and therefore supporting the earth we all share. And when you have these areas remote, usually where we buy all remote, where we buy our coffee from, you have something that hardly exists in America anymore and is really threatened in Latin America, Central America, which are economically viable local economies. Because bird-friendly coffee is an old-fashioned crop. It requires a lot of horticulture. And it can maintain that horticulture because coffee is for farmers, is a very high margin commodity. So unlike so many agricultural commodities that aren't high margins, so you need real big volume, with coffee, you can make a living with as little as 2 acres or even an acre and a half of coffee farm in your forest on your farm. Next slide, please. So there's lots of things we can do to help, and we list them all in several of our website and our publications and our lectures and so on and so forth. But the most important thing that we can do, we Birds and Beans Coffee, is make sure that we bring really good tasting bird-friendly coffee to our customers in the United States. We sell most of our coffee online, direct to consumer. We have orders every month from every state in the union, including Alaska and Hawaii. And we've grown that business since 2008. And our goal when we started was not just to grow our own business, but to convince the coffee sector that bird-friendly coffee was a good idea. Because when we started, the reason we started the business, myself and my family and some partners in Canada who were already starting Birds and Beans Coffee in Canada, was because the certification was disappearing. And this certification is non-corrupted, completely scientifically based, and run by a group of bird people and scientists and geologists and ornithologists. You mentioned Doug Talomi. He's done studies for the Smithsonian Migratory Bird Center at the National Zoo. So when people really started to look about population drop in birds, now we're going back a long time. A guy named Russ Greenberg, who's sadly no longer with us, but he'd done his doctoral work in Panama. And when they were trying to figure out why, I think they were working on wood thrush especially, were declining, he said, wait a minute, it could be in Latin America as well as in North America. And they did a lot of work, a lot of field work, in the field work, not Zoom field work. And they found out, yeah, that's right. And if we look at the next slide, you'll see a little bit why. Next slide, please. Yeah, so the 5 reasons to buy and drink this stuff: it saves neotropical migrant and local bird species, it conserves forests and habitat, it keeps toxic chemicals out of the ecosystem, it supports farm families and local communities, and it preserves healthy microclimates. On the coffee farms that we buy from, if there's a piece of land nearby that has been clear cut for mostly for pasture, for beef, the temperature on the farm is usually 3 degrees to 5 degrees centigrade uh, lower than the temperature out on the pasture. So, it's like a natural ecosystem with some agricultural work going on underneath it, with a high margin agricultural commodity. And the reason it's so good for local economies, local communities, is this kind of coffee creates a lot of work. It's not very mechanized. The coffee in Brazil and the coffee in Colombia are now very mechanized, like wheat, like maize, like corn. But bird-friendly coffee isn't, because it grows under trees, because it doesn't fix nitrate. It contributes to the environment that it grows in, because it sheds leaves and berries if you don't pick them. And it requires a nursery on the farm to grow replacement stock, because it takes 3 to 5 years to get a tree to the bearing stage, and then it lasts for 5 to maybe 11 or 12 years. So you've got to always be replacing your stock, but your stock is always trees, little coffee trees, shrubs. And so to pick the coffee from these requires what in the coffee business they call passes. So you have to go through all of the trees, which is very rugged places a lot of the time, several times, because filtered sun means the cherries, which is what surround the coffee bean, ripen in different ways and stages. So you have several passes. So you need pickers. In some of the countries, Nicaragua is our favorite country, but never mind. They've actually passed laws that little children can't be in the fields picking, and there's a minimum wage for coffee pickers, which is a big deal. If you've ever seen any sort of big agra work being done by field workers, you know that that's a big deal. But anyhow, it creates this more symbiotic relationship, not just the coffee with the forest, but the farmers and their helpers and the town with the community. Next slide, please. So here's the big deal, okay? If you look at this slide, you can see why this is important. All the way over on the right is a bird-friendly, shade-grown coffee farm. And this has to be certified every 3 years. And the certification standards are variety of trees, height of trees, native trees, no organic, no inorganic, no strictly organic farming, clean water. So this is like almost a pristine forest, which has an agricultural crop with a high value growing within the forest. So on these small farms, what you typically have is coffee is what pays all the bills. There's usually some citrus fruits and a family garden and chickens and occasionally a cow and occasionally a donkey or a burro or a horse. And it's a self-sustaining farm. And then as the coffee is picked, it's dried in the sun on racks. People have to rotate the coffee every day. But before it's dried, it goes through what's called a wet processing, which takes the cherry off of the bean. The only animals that eat coffee are human beings. Everybody else finds it poisonous. Interesting. And that coffee dries in the sun, and then it goes to a dry mill, which is a central milling facility for the community where the co-op takes it. And it's always segregated. It's always kept in an organic environment. It can't have the certification. There's not a chain of custody all the way from the farm certified, and the chain of custody has to be intact completely from the farm to the bag that we send our coffee in to our customers. And you can see okay, everybody here loves birds and they know a lot about nature and birds and farms. And you can see that in here, in the shade grown coffee area, there's, we've actually now we've got like this up to 350 species. We did surveys with Scott Weidensoul and Ken Kaufman and Bridget Suchbury and a lot of young people from Hawk Mountain and some young people from North Branch Nature Center and some young people from Minnesota Audubon Society. We did the surveys on the farms and found lots and lots of birds, of course, and lots of birds that we also see in North America. And we actually did 4 surveys on organic dairy farms that were part of the Organic Valley Co-op in Michigan, Ohio, and no, sorry, Minnesota, Ohio, North Carolina, and Vermont. And yeah, all the birds that we find where we get the coffee are also up on the farms where we did the bird surveys. So it's a great way to grow a great food. And we want you to help us by buying this stuff and drinking it. Yeah, and it costs money. So next slide, please. So what can we do? We're losing the battle, obviously, with climate change. We're losing the battle with bird populations, but maybe not, maybe we're coming back now. But the thing that got me into coffee, besides I like birds and I like coffee and I like working for myself, is that everyday small choices. A cup of coffee, if you love coffee, you're gonna have a lot of cups. Even if you just drink coffee regularly, you're gonna have a cup or 2 a day. And if you buy it at home, including shipping, our coffee is gonna cost like something like 50, 60 cents a cup. Now, if you buy coffee at the place that mostly doesn't sell coffee, but sells sugar drinks with a mermaid on the bottle, on the cup, you're going to pay what, $2, $3, $4, $5 now. So I don't get it, but I never have anyhow. So we can help in lots of different ways. And bird-friendly coffee is one of the small ways that we can do big things. It's about our consumption habits. So to help you help us, next slide, please. Thanks to Lisa, we're going to give everybody in Wisconsin $10 off any online purchase in August that's over $20 worth of coffee. So that means if you bought like 2 12-ounce bags, one for you and one for a friend, or one for you to try one roast and the other roast, you would get something like you would get coffee for like 45, 46 cents a cup at home. And if you like it a lot, then you won't mind subscribing, in which case the shipping's only $6.50, or if you don't want to subscribe, regular shipping is $10.50. We lose a ton of money on shipping. Amazon includes the shipping in the margins of the products that they sell you. We charge shipping and we pay the balance because we know that shipping is something people don't like to pay, and they've been trained that shipping should be free. And as my grandmother once said, nothing's free, Billy. So anyhow, buy bird-friendly coffee, buy our bird-friendly coffee, take $10 off, and you'll like the coffee. And we know that you love birds. So next slide, last slide. Thank you. And my colleagues at Birds and Beans, thank you. And I have to thank Lisa a lot. She's gotten us into a lot of different places with our bird-friendly coffee story. And I really enjoyed meeting all of you today and learning about hummingbirds. Oh, one last story. Sorry. One of the best things I've ever seen on with the coffee farms I buy from is there's a tropical bird called a magpie jay. It is a wonderful bird. It's like a big jay, but it acts more like a magpie than a jay, if you know what I mean. And 2 magpie jays were chasing a broad-winged hawk on one of the farms I was visiting, and out of the brush came a male ruby-throated hummingbird attacking both of the magpie jays, because hummingbirds, even where they go in the winter rather, are very aggressive, very territorial, the males, and the females. And one last story on that. We can find sometimes on the farms mixed flocks of all the orioles that come to North America, flocking together, feeding together. So it's really an old-fashioned way of conserving. And thanks a lot.
All right. Thank you so much, Bill. That was really interesting. I learned a lot more. I dare I say it was eye-opening.
Fun.
You did get one question, and that was from Catherine. She said, have any plan to expand the business?
Yeah, we'll try to expand every year. We've grown a little bit bigger than the year before. We are working with the farms in Vermont on their bird-friendly maple syrup program, co-promoting that. As you probably know, Wisconsin is actually the biggest maple syrup producer in the United States. Canada's ahead of the rest of it, but there is a certification for bird-friendly maple syrup, which we promote. And we're working a lot with the forests in New England about forestry that relates to bird conservation. And there's a lot of good work going on there. And yeah, so we keep growing. We thought about other products, but we like coffee and maple syrup, and we might be doing a bird-friendly breakfast box in January, which
Right.
has
Something to
in it.
Something to look forward to. Thanks again, Bill. Can everybody see and hear me? I think we've got control. So I just wanted to put up a little bit of a reminder slide. And Bill is such a generous guy that between the time when I turned my slide set in at 10 o'clock this morning, he extended the discount all the way to the end of August. Right, Bill?
That's right.
So my slide is a little outdated, but kind of the take-home message from my slide is the coffee farms that Bill and other bird-friendly certified roasters buy from, they support some of our favorite backyard birds like the ruby-throated hummingbird, the scarlet tanager, Baltimore orioles, indigo buntings, yellow warblers, rose-breasted grosbeak. So just lots of wonderful birds. So as Bill said, with the discount that he's got on for August, it's about 45 cents for a cup of coffee. And I know I pay a lot more for that at a local coffee store. So give it a try. Anyway, we'll start by talking about protecting habitat for our hummingbirds and songbirds in Central and South America is an important thing we can do. And this is another important thing that we can do, which is to protect hummingbirds and songbirds and other birds from hitting windows, because studies have shown that can kill up to 3.5 billion, and that's billion with a B, birds in the United States every year. And nearly half of that can be at our home. So it's a serious problem. What happens is songbirds, most birds migrate at night. They come down in the early morning, and then they will go out to look for food. And they will see a window like this top one where you can see trees or some kind of tempting habitat that appeals in the top, that appeals to them, and they think that they can fly to that or fly through it. And boom, they hit the solid window, and that for most of them, that's going to be the end of them. Even if the studies have shown that even if they kind of come to and fly away or are taken to a wildlife rehabilitator, up to 60 to 70% of those birds that are taken to the wildlife rehabilitator still end up dying. So it's not good odds. The bottom photo shows what they call is another problem that involves glass, which is when there's like a skyway, you have two windows that are opposite each other, and a bird can see a habitat again that looks appealing to the bird on the other side of the glass. So that can be another problem for birds. Next slide. So the good news is that there are lots of solutions, and it can be as easy if you have a double hung window. You probably have exterior insect screens, so put those up. The American Bird Conservancy does testing of dozens of products to see which are most effective, and screens come up showing some of the best, the most effective for preventing birds from hitting windows. So that's a great option. Next slide. So other good solutions, there's a variety of, actually lots of different products that will allow you to apply a pattern or lines or decals to the outside of the window to break up the reflection. So again, that signals to birds that, that's a place that they should not go to. It's important in these cases, again, you place it on the exterior of the window, and whatever you're putting up, whether it's a line or a decal or some kind of a pattern, those items should be at least no more than 2 inches apart. That's what the testing from American Bird Conservancy has shown. It needs to be effective, because a small bird like a hummingbird otherwise sees a space and thinks it can maneuver through there. Next slide. So this is just one example. It's a product called Feather Friendly. It's a tape, and hopefully you can see this, but it's a product that again goes on the outside of the window. It's about 1/4 of an inch wide, and you, as you can see, Joy and Kai are installing it to their home window here. You get some measuring tapes included with the box. And then you use it to line up the tapes about every 2 inches apart. And then they give you a tool, a little plastic tool that you use to really push the tape into the glass. And then you pull the backing off, and it leaves behind just the dots. And that is, again, has been tested by American Bird Conservancy and found to be very effective, and it's pretty unobtrusive. So your eye adjusts to it, and it doesn't really take up a lot of space. One of the problems with decals that are quite popular, maybe I've seen lots of like leaf decals or flower decals, is that you would have to have so many of them and still have to be 2 inches apart, that you're not going to have a lot of your window left to look out. So again, feather friendly, and there's other products. We've got list of products on our SOS Save Our Songbirds website. So does Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance. So I encourage you to kind of look that over and see what options there are. Next slide. So another kind of solution is a 3D solution. This one is called an Acopian bird saver, and it's also known as a Zen wind curtain. And the gentleman that invented it, Jeff Acopian in Pennsylvania, he has a website where you can put in the dimensions of your window, and he will customize and make and sell an Acopian bird saver. Or he also has do-it-yourself instructions on his website. And this photo right here, the Aldo Leopold Audubon Society hosted a workshop in March where people could come with the dimensions of their window and could make one of these Acopian bird savers. It's very straightforward. It uses parachute cord and is very inexpensive, and has also been shown to be very effective through the American Bird Conservancy testing. Next slide, please. So it's really important. The studies have shown that birds colliding with windows can happen at any time of the year, but probably heaviest impacts are during the migrations. And we are starting to ramp up migration here in Wisconsin. This shows Saturday nights. I don't know if you're familiar with Birdcast, but birdcast.info is a fantastic site, a great way to enjoy the migration. And on Saturday night, over 3 million birds crossed Wisconsin overnight. And at one time, at the peak time, more than 7.6 million birds were in flight. Next slide. And that compares to Friday or Thursday night, just a few nights earlier when we only had 28,000 birds crossing. So again, you know, it's getting to be that time of the year where more of the birds are going to be crossing. So if we can take some action and treat our worst window, that will really go a long way to help birds. Next slide, please. So hopefully you can take a couple of days here, a couple of weeks to get some type of a solution up. Most people know what their worst window is. It's the one that birds have hit in the past, or it might be a big picture window, or one that is close to your bird feeders. So it's important to get started on that now. We do have plenty of time in the sense that most warblers are coming through in September, and then some of the short distance migrants more so in October. But you know, good to get started on that if you have a problem window that birds have hit. And what we can all do in the next 24 hours is we can turn off non-essential lights, because birds, again, migrate at night. And the concern is that if we have a lot of lights on and we are attracting them to our city, they're going to come down in an area that's dense with buildings. And when they start moving around in the morning to find food, they're just going to have that many more hazardous buildings that they could run into. So bird experts encourage us to turn off our non-essential lights 11 p.m. to 6 a.m. during these 2 migration periods. So that's one thing we can do in the next 24 hours. And why it's so important, next slide, please, is because, oops, I'm sorry, go back one slide. I forgot to make that point. So this photo, this image here is from Birdcast, and Birdcast uses weather radar to make forecast maps of what the bird traffic is going to be overnight. And as you can see, it's a high level of birds that are going to be moving around August 19th, tomorrow. And even in Wisconsin, it looks like we're in the kind of forecast for medium. So again, we're going to have millions of birds coming over, and those birds are going to be landing. And you know, we want them to kind of push on to areas where there are fewer houses, you know, when they wake up in the morning. So next slide. Oh, other way. All right. So these are some things, again, that you can do in addition to turning off non-essential lights at night. You can put your bird feeders within 3 feet of the window or more than 35 feet away. That is what the research is showing can help reduce bird collisions, because if they're within 3 feet, they don't have a big head of steam. And if they're more than 35 feet away, they can turn away from the window. The experts are also even saying that if you have Venetian blinds on your worst window, you can pull that halfway. And kind of the rule of thumb is, if you want to try a solution that's on the inside of your house, you can go outside, and if you can see it from the outside, chances are a bird can see it. And so that is something that might help. It won't be as effective as if you put up a treatment, but it will do some good. And then for all of us who don't like cleaning windows, this is the permission you need to take a break from cleaning your windows, because actually dirty windows tend to kind of dull the reflection and help our birds. So next slide. So I also didn't want to end on kind of a down note, because bird collisions are very serious. As I mentioned, they can kill up to 3.5 billion birds a year. But if you live in the Madison area or you're within driving distance, pack up your kids or your grandkids and join us for National Hummingbird Day, which is Saturday, September 6th. We'll be celebrating at Henry Vila Zoo. We'll have all kinds of kind of learning opportunities, a chance to make a hummingbird mask. We'll have free native plants to give away, bird-friendly coffee samples from Bill. We have a limited number of free train ride and carousel ride tokens. And you'll also be able to see the carousel building, which has been treated through donations by Feather Friendly and by SOS Save Our Songbirds. and you'll be able to talk to the Bird Collision Corps volunteers. So these are volunteers from Southern Wisconsin Bird Alliance who monitor buildings during migration to see if treatments are working, or if it's a campus where there haven't been treatments, to try to identify which are the problem windows. So we'd love to see you out there. And next slide. That is it for the presentation. We thank you so much for joining us tonight. We know that many of you are already taking steps at home to help hummingbirds and songbirds. And we say, keep up the great work. We hope you've learned a new thing or two to help hummingbirds at home, and we'll try it in the coming days and weeks. You're going to receive a follow-up email with links to some of the resources mentioned by the speaker and more information about the sponsoring organizations. We encourage you to share this information with your family and friends. As you saw from the slides that Bill put up with the 30%, almost 30% of our birds vanishing from North America since 1970, we're kind of in a, we need all hands on deck to help our hummingbirds and our birds, and together we can make a big difference for them. Thanks again for tuning in, and good birding.